Today's story was sent to us by a woman who carried one secret for 50 years and almost took it to the grave. At 73 years old, she finally looked at her son and said, "The man who raised you was never your real father." What happened after that shattered everything he believed about his life, because his father had died 3 years earlier without ever knowing the truth. And the real biological father had vanished before his son was even born. No photos on the walls, no stories, no grave anyone could point to. Just a name his mother had buried for half a century. Her name was Eleanor. She was a widow living alone outside Manchester, the kind of woman people described as gentle and ordinary. Nobody around her would have guessed she spent most of her life carrying something this heavy, but according to her, every birthday dinner, every Christmas morning, every family photograph came with the same private fear sitting in the back of her mind. What if today is the day everything falls apart? The story began in 1971. Eleanor was 20 years old and deeply involved with a man named Michael. At first, he made her feel special in a way nobody else ever had. He was confident, charming, full of plans and big promises. The kind of man who could walk into a room and make people pay attention to him immediately. Eleanor did what many young people do when they fall hard for someone. She ignored what was right in front of her. Michael disappeared for days sometimes. He avoided serious conversations. Small lies kept appearing inside ordinary moments. Then one evening, Eleanor noticed another woman's lipstick on his jacket collar. When she confronted him, he barely reacted. A few weeks later, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. She still remembers sitting alone in the bathroom, staring at the test result while traffic moved outside her apartment window like nothing had changed. But her whole life had changed. When she told Michael, he went completely cold. No panic, no comfort, no excitement. He just looked at her and said, "You'll figure something out." Then he walked out of her life for good. That was the last time she ever saw him. Years later, she heard rumors that he moved overseas. Someone else claimed he died in a motorcycle accident somewhere in Spain. But Eleanor never knew which story was true, and eventually she stopped trying to find out. Around that same time, another man had quietly entered her life. His name was Harold. He worked with Eleanor at a department store and couldn't have been more different from Michael. Quiet, reliable, gentle in the smallest ways. He remembered how she liked her tea, walked her home after late shifts, fixed things without being asked. With Harold, Eleanor felt calm instead of nervous. But Harold didn't know she was pregnant. Eleanor kept hiding it under loose sweaters, terrified he would leave too if he found out the baby belonged to someone else. Then one rainy evening, while they stood waiting under a bus shelter after work, Harold asked her to marry him. No dramatic speech. He simply said he thought they could build a good life together. And standing there in the rain, Eleanor made the decision that will follow her for the next 50 years. She said yes, and she never told him the child wasn't his. A few months later, Daniel was born. Harold held that baby like he was holding the most important thing he'd ever touched. Eleanor watched him standing beside the hospital window with tears in his eyes as he whispered softly, "That's my boy." The guilt hit her immediately, but she stayed silent. And as the years passed, silence became part of the structure of their family. Harold turned out to be an incredible father. School runs before work, football matches on weekends, sitting beside Daniel's bed during fevers, teaching him how to shave in front of the bathroom mirror. Daniel adored him. By the time he was a teenager, he copied Harold without even realizing it. The same posture, the same habits, even the same way of rolling up his sleeves. Sometimes Eleanor would watch them together from the kitchen doorway and feel two things at once, grateful and trapped, because every happy year made the truth harder to tell. Then life kept moving. Daniel got married, had children of his own, and Harold became the grandfather every child deserves. The kind who showed up early to school plays and kept sweets hidden in his coat pocket. Meanwhile, the truth stayed buried until Harold got sick. Pancreatic cancer, fast and brutal. During his final months, Eleanor cared for him at home. One night, while looking through old family photos together, Harold smiled at a picture of Daniel and quietly said, "He never looked much like me, but he's mine where it matters." Eleanor nearly confessed right there, but he was dying, and she couldn't bring herself to place that weight on him at the end of his life. So Harold died believing Daniel was his biological son. And for a while, Eleanor convinced herself the secret would die too. Then Daniel's daughter bought DNA ancestry kits for the family as a Christmas gift. At first it seemed harmless. Everyone laughed about it over dinner, guessing who might have Irish roots or distant relatives in America. But a few weeks later, Daniel called Eleanor, sounding confused. His results didn't make sense. Names kept appearing that he didn't recognize. Entire branches of relatives connected to nobody from Harold's side. At first, Daniel thought there had been a mistake. Then more matches appeared. Strangers sharing his blood. Strangers connected closely enough that there was no simple explanation anymore. That was the moment Eleanor realized the truth was no longer staying buried. It was already finding its way to the surface. The next morning, she asked Daniel to come over. She barely slept the night before. Every sentence sounded terrible in her head no matter how she rehearsed it. When Daniel arrived, he sat at the kitchen table and asked immediately if this was about the DNA test. Eleanor looked at her son, now a grown man with gray in his beard and daughters of his own, and finally said the words she had spent 50 years avoiding. "Harold wasn't your biological father." Daniel actually laughed at first, just for a second, like his brain refused to accept what he'd heard. Then he saw his mother crying, and the color slowly disappeared from his face. Eleanor told him everything. Michael, the pregnancy, the lie, all of it. Daniel sat completely still through the entire story. Then finally he asked, "Did Dad know?" When Eleanor said no, Daniel stood up and turned away from her immediately. One hand covered his mouth while the other rested against the kitchen counter like he suddenly needed something to hold on to. And in that moment, Eleanor realized the truth hadn't only changed Daniel's past. It had changed Harold's too. After a long silence, Daniel looked toward the framed photograph sitting near the hallway and said quietly, "He loved me more than anyone." Then he left. For 2 weeks, he barely spoke to her. Eleanor became convinced she had destroyed her family at the very end of her life. Then one Sunday afternoon, Daniel appeared at her front door unexpectedly. He looked exhausted, thinner somehow. After sitting quietly for a few minutes, he asked her something she never expected. "Do you have any pictures of Michael?" Eleanor froze, because after all those years, she had only one photograph left, an old faded picture hidden deep inside a bedroom drawer. She brought it downstairs carefully and placed it on the table between them. Young Michael leaning against a motorcycle, smiling straight at the camera like the world belonged to him. Daniel stared at the photograph for a long time. The room went completely silent, and then Eleanor saw it, the eyes. For the first time in his life, her son was looking at the face of the man whose blood he carried and seeing pieces of himself staring back. But instead of comfort, disappointment slowly spread across Daniel's face, because after 50 years of mystery, the man he imagined in his head was just a stranger who walked away before he was born. Finally, Daniel handed the photograph back, and very quietly he said, "That man may be my biological father, but he'll never be my dad." Then he looked toward Harold's empty chair again, and his expression changed completely. Like all at once, he understood that the man who stayed mattered far more than the man who disappeared. Over time, things between Eleanor and Daniel slowly improved. Not perfectly. Some wounds stayed tender, but the silence between them finally disappeared. One evening before leaving her house, Daniel stopped beside an old family photograph near the hallway. It was the picture taken the day he was born. Harold standing there smiling proudly beside the hospital bed. Daniel stared at it for a few seconds, then quietly said, he meant it when he said, "That's my boy." Today, Harold's photograph still sits in Daniel's living room, not Michael's, because in the end, blood explained where he came from, but love explained who raised him. And sometimes the person who gives you life isn't the person who truly becomes your father.